The cold street snow drifted slowly from the dark sky, landing softly on the cracked stone roads. The alien city was quiet, except for the wind that moved through the narrow streets like a ghost. The lamps on the corners gave only a weak yellow glow, and the air was sharp enough to bite. She walked alone, her thin blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her name was Sarah, but no one in the city said it anymore. To them, she was only the cursed widow, a woman who had lost her mate and was now unwanted by every door she had knocked on. Her feet were numb from the cold. She had not eaten since morning. The blanket was old and thin. Barely stopping the wind from cutting into her skin, she kept her eyes low, avoiding the stares of strangers passing by. Some turned away quickly. Others looked at her with disgust. Sarah passed a food stall. The smell of warm bread made her stomach twist painfully. She slowed down, hoping for even the smallest kindness. But the stall owner noticed her and waved his hand angrily. "Go away," he said. "I don't want bad luck near my shop." She turned away without a word. The shame burned hotter than the cold. No home wanted a widow like her in her world. A woman who had lost her mate was believed to carry misfortune. People whispered that death followed her steps. She knew it was only an old superstition. But no one cared about truth. Fear was stronger than reason. She walked further down the street. The wind grew stronger, pushing snow into her face. She found a dark corner between two closed shops and sat down, pulling her knees to her chest. She whispered to herself, "I just want warmth." Just for one night, her breath turned into little clouds in the air, fading quickly like her hope. Across the street, a man was walking alone. His steps were slow, and he carried a small bag over his shoulder. He was human, a rare sight in this part of the city. His name was Daniel, and he had come here for work months ago. Unlike most, he did not hurry past her. Instead, he stopped, his eyes resting on her small, shaking form. Sarah noticed him looking. Her heart tightened. She had learned to expect cruelty or demands from anyone who approached. Maybe he would throw coins at her feet to feel proud, or maybe he would tell her to move away from the street. She pulled her blanket tighter. Daniel crossed the street slowly. The snow crunched under his boots. He stopped a few steps away and spoke in a voice that was calm and warm. "You'll freeze out here," he said. She looked up at him with guarded eyes. "I'm fine," she lied. Her voice was weak. He didn't believe her. From his bag, he pulled out a thick wool coat. Without a word, he held it out to her. She shook her head. "I can't take that," she whispered. "It's yours." "You need it more than I do," Daniel replied. His tone was gentle. But there was no room for argument. He stepped closer and placed the coat on her shoulders. The sudden warmth almost made her cry, but she bit her lip and stayed silent. "Why?" she asked after a long moment. "Why help me?" Daniel looked at her as if the answer was obvious. "Because no one should freeze to death," he said simply. Sarah lowered her eyes. She wanted to believe him, but trust was a dangerous thing. Still, the warmth of the coat spread through her body, chasing away the worst of the cold. "You'll get sick without this," she said, trying to hand it back. He shook his head. "I have a fire where I'm staying." Then, after a pause, he added, "It's not far. If you want, you can come warm yourself for a while." Her heart pounded. Part of her wanted to run away, thinking there must be a cost for his kindness. But another part? The part that was tired and cold and so desperately lonely, wanted to follow him. The snow kept falling. The street was empty again, except for the two of them. Daniel stood waiting, his breath turning to mist in the frozen air. Sarah looked at the road behind her. It led only to more closed doors. More whispers, more cold. She looked at him again. His eyes were steady, not demanding, not pitying. Just waiting for her choice. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. She stood slowly, her legs stiff from sitting in the cold. She took a step toward him, then another, but deep inside, she still wondered, was this the night she finally found? Warmth, or the night she walked into another kind of danger? The offer. The snow crunched under their feet as Sarah followed Daniel. Her steps were slow, not only because of the cold, but because every move felt like a risk. She kept her eyes on his back, watching the way his shoulders moved under his coat. Daniel didn't speak at first. He walked with an easy pace, making sure she could keep up. The street lamps faded behind them, and soon they were walking through narrower paths where the snow piled high against the walls. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," he said over his shoulder. His voice was calm, carrying no pressure. Sarah's fingers tightened on the blanket. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. He glanced back at her. "Because you're cold." "That's not an answer," she replied. The words came out sharper than she meant, but she didn't take them back. Daniel slowed his steps. "You've been treated badly here, haven't you?" he asked. She gave a bitter laugh. "Treated badly would mean they at least treated me like I existed." They turned a corner. The sound of the wind lessened as the walls rose higher. It felt quieter here, almost safe, after a few more steps. Daniel pointed to a small building ahead. The light from inside was dim but warm. "That's my place," he said. Sarah stopped walking. Her instincts screamed for her to turn back. She had been in situations before where a stranger's kindness was only a trap. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Daniel frowned. "I want you to be warm," he said. "That's it." She stared at him for a long moment, trying to see if his face held any sign of deception, but his expression was steady, honest, and strangely patient. Still, she didn't move. "If I come inside." "I'm not promising anything," she warned. "You don't owe me anything," Daniel said without hesitation. Then he stepped forward, unlocked the door, and pushed it open. The smell of burning wood and something faintly sweet drifted into the cold night. Sarah hesitated. Her toes were numb, her fingers stiff. The thought of warmth pulled at her, but the fear of what might come after kept her rooted to the ground. Daniel didn't push. He left the door open and stepped aside. "It's warmer in here," he said, "but it's your choice." That single sentence struck her. She had not been given a choice in a long time. Finally, she took a slow step forward, crossing the doorway. The warmth hit her like a wave, making her shiver. The inside was small, but clean. A single bed pushed against the far wall. A wooden table with 2 chairs and a fire crackling in the corner stove. Daniel closed the door gently, shaking the snow from his boots. "Sit by the fire," he said. Nodding toward a chair, she moved closer to the heat. Holding out her hands, her skin stung as the warmth returned. Her eyes closed for a brief moment, letting herself breathe. Daniel placed a steaming cup on the table beside her. "It's just tea," he said. "Nothing fancy." She opened her eyes and looked at the cup. "Why are you so kind?" she asked again. This time her voice was softer, almost tired. Daniel sat in the other chair. "Because I can be," he replied. "And because I've been cold before too." They sat in silence for a while. The fire popped softly, the snow outside tapping against the window. Sarah's eyes wandered around the small space. There was nothing here to suggest he was wealthy. No gold, no fine fabrics, no expensive gadgets. Just the basics, well kept and warm. She realized something else. There was only one bed. Her gaze flicked to Daniel, wondering if he expected her to notice. He caught her glance and smiled faintly. "You can take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep on the floor." Her lips parted in surprise. "Why?" "Because you need it more," he said simply, as if that was enough, for a moment. Her chest ached in a way she didn't understand. She had been seen as a curse for so long that even the smallest act of care felt overwhelming. She wanted to tell him she didn't trust him, that she couldn't trust anyone, but instead she found herself whispering, "Thank you." Daniel nodded. "You can stay as long as you need to get warm," he said. Then his eyes softened, "And if you decide to leave tomorrow, I won't stop you." Sarah lowered her gaze. She didn't know yet if she would stay. But as she sipped the tea, feeling its heat spread through her, she thought maybe, just maybe, she wanted to. To shelter the firelight painted the small shelter in shades of gold and shadow. The warmth inside felt unreal after the freezing streets. Sarah sat near the stove, her blanket draped loosely over her shoulders now. Her hands no longer shook. But her mind was still restless. Daniel moved around the space with a quiet efficiency. Hanging his wet coat on a hook, setting his boots near the door, he didn't speak much. And his silence wasn't heavy or demanding. It simply gave her space, something she wasn't used to. "You can put your blanket there," he said, nodding toward a wooden bench by the wall. "It looks like it's been through too many winters." She managed a small smile. "It has," she said, laying it down. The fabric was thin and worn, barely worth keeping, yet it had been her only shield against the cold for too long. Daniel poured more water into the kettle. "Hungry?" he asked. Sarah hesitated. Her pride wanted to say no, but her stomach answered with a low growl. "A little," she admitted. He opened a small cupboard and took out a loaf of bread and a jar of something sweet-smelling. "It's not much, but it's warm," he said, cutting the bread into thick slices. The smell filled the air. Simple but comforting. As she ate, she felt his eyes on her, not in a way that weighed her down, but as if he was trying to understand her without asking questions. Finally, she broke the silence. "You're different." He looked at her curiously. "Different how?" "Everyone else, they see me and turn away," she said. "They see the widow, the curse, the bad luck." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I see a person." Her chest tightened at those words. She looked down at her hands, tracing the rough lines of her palms. "After my mate died, the doors closed. People I had known for years crossed the street to avoid me. Even my own blood refused to let me in." Her voice wavered, but she kept talking. "I slept outside for the first week, thinking someone would eventually change. Their mind, no one did." Daniel didn't interrupt. He just listened, his expression calm but not cold. "The worst part wasn't the cold or the hunger," she said quietly. "It was the feeling that I had disappeared, like I was no longer part of this world." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. He looked at the fire. "I've been alone before, too," he said. "I know how it feels when the world turns its back." She studied him for a moment. "And yet, you still opened your door to me." He gave a small shrug. "Maybe because I know what I would have wanted if I was in your place." The room went quiet again, except for the gentle crackle of the fire. Sarah glanced at the bed in the corner, clean and neatly made. "You meant it?" she asked. "About giving me the bed?" "I don't say things I don't mean," he replied. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. Then, "Thank you." Daniel stood and picked up a rolled mat from under the table. "I'll be fine on the floor," he said, setting it down near the stove. "The heat will keep me warm." She wanted to protest, but the weight of exhaustion was pulling her down. The bed looked too inviting to resist. As she lay down, the mattress soft under her, she realized she couldn't remember the last time she had been in a real bed. She pulled the blanket over herself, the warmth from the fire reaching her toes. Daniel sat near the stove, his back to her, watching the flames. She closed her eyes, feeling safer than she had in months. Just before sleep claimed her, she whispered into the quiet. "Daniel." He turned his head slightly. "Yes." "I don't know if I'll stay," she said softly. "But tonight, you've given me more than anyone else has in a long time." He didn't answer right away, but when he did, his voice was steady. "Then it was worth it." Her breathing slowed, the sound of the fire and the steady calm in his tone, carrying her into sleep. For the first time since her mate's death, she didn't dream of cold streets. The town's judgment the next morning. The snow had stopped, but the cold air still clung to the streets. Sarah woke to the smell of something cooking. She opened her eyes to see Daniel at the small stove, stirring a pot. "You sleep all right?" he asked without turning. She hesitated, then nodded. "Better than I have in months." "Good," he said simply. Placing a bowl on the table, the steam carried the scent of herbs and vegetables. They ate quietly, the warmth of the food easing the stiffness in her body, but as soon as they stepped outside, the world beyond the door reminded her why she had feared staying. The narrow streets were alive with murmurs, heads turned, eyes followed. She could hear the whispers even when they pretended not to speak. "That's her. The widow? She's cursed. He doesn't know what he's bringing into his home. She'll bring him ruin." Sarah kept her gaze forward, trying to let the words slide past her, but each one stuck like a thorn. Daniel noticed. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he walked closer to her, his presence a quiet shield. At the market, the stares grew sharper when she reached for a basket of bread. The seller pulled it back. "Not for you," he muttered. Glancing at Daniel, "You should know better." Daniel took the basket from the man's hands and set coins on the counter without a word. The seller didn't meet his eyes as they walked away. Sarah's voice was low. "You don't have to do that." "Yes, I do," Daniel replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. They visited a few more stalls, but the pattern was the same. Muttered warnings, avoided eyes, and goods pulled away from her reach on their way back. A group of men leaned against a wall, watching them. One of them smirked. "Careful, human," he called. "You keep her around, and you'll be digging your own grave." Sarah's steps faltered. The heat of shame crept up her neck. Daniel stopped, turned his head, and looked at the man for a long moment. He didn't speak, but the weight of his stare was enough to quiet the laughter. Back at the shelter, Sarah moved to the far side of the room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "You heard them," she said quietly. "They're right." "No," Daniel said firmly, setting down the basket of food. "They're wrong," she shook her head. "You don't understand. They've believed these things all their lives. If you keep me here, you'll lose whatever peace you have." Daniel stepped closer. "Peace isn't worth having if it means letting someone freeze on the street." Her eyes lifted to meet his, searching for any sign that he might give up. She found none. The day passed slowly. The murmurs from the street still echoed in her mind. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint noise outside made her wonder if someone was planning to come here. When night fell, Daniel locked the door. The wind outside had started again. Rattling the windows, Sarah sat near the fire, her knees drawn up. "Do you regret it?" she asked suddenly, letting me in. Daniel looked at her across the firelight. Not for a second. Her chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, but the fear of what the town might do was hard to ignore. As the fire burned lower, a sound came from outside, slow, deliberate. Knocks on the door. Daniel stood, his expression calm but alert. "Stay here," he said. Sarah's pulse quickened. She listened as the door opened just a crack. A low voice spoke from outside. "If you don't get rid of her, you'll regret it." Daniel didn't answer right away. The door closed with a solid thud, and he slid the lock back into place. He turned to her, his voice steady. "They're not going to decide who I let into my home," but in Sarah's heart, she knew this was only the beginning. The cold outside was nothing compared to the chill of the town's judgment. The breaking point, the wind outside howled against the small shelter, carrying with it the bite of deep winter. Inside, the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Daniel sat at the table, mending a tear in his coat, while Sarah sat near the stove, staring into the flames without really seeing them. The knock from the night before still echoed in her mind. The warning had been clear. She could picture the faces of the men in the market, the cold stares of the townsfolk. She knew how far gossip could go and how quickly it could turn to action. She had seen it happen before. Daniel glanced at her, noticing the way she was holding herself tighter than usual. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "I'm thinking." She replied, not looking away from the fire. "About what?" he asked, his voice calm, her lips pressed into a thin line. "About what's going to happen if I stay." Daniel put down his needle and thread. "We've already talked about this." "No," she said, her voice sharper now. "We haven't. You think you can just ignore them, but they won't ignore you. Not while I'm here." He leaned back in his chair. "I can handle them." Sarah shook her head. "Not if they decide to take it further." The silence between them grew heavy. The fire popped, sending a faint spray of sparks up the chimney. Later that night, when Daniel had gone to bed, Sarah sat in the dark. Her decision had been made. She moved quietly, wrapping her old blanket around her shoulders and stepping into the boots Daniel had found for her. She glanced at him sleeping on the mat by the stove. His face was peaceful in the dim light. She whispered, "Thank you," even though she knew he wouldn't hear it. Slowly, she unlocked the door. The cold rushed in immediately. She stepped outside, her breath turning into clouds. The snow crunched under her feet as she took her first steps toward the street, going somewhere. The voice behind her froze her in place. She turned to see Daniel standing in the doorway. Awake, his expression unreadable. I can't stay," she said. "It's better for you if I leave." "No," Daniel said firmly. Stepping toward her, "You don't get to decide what's better for me." Her throat tightened. "You don't understand. If you keep me here, they'll come after you." "Then let them," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not sending you back into the cold just because they don't like it." Her hands gripped the blanket tighter. "Why?" she asked, the question breaking out like a crack in ice. "Why risk yourself for me?" Daniel's answer was simple. "Because you're worth it." She shook her head. "I'm not." "Yes, you are," he said, stepping closer. "You've been told you're not for so long that you've started to believe it, but I see you. Sarah and I know better." Her chest ached. The weight of his words pressed against years of rejection. Years of being treated like she was less than nothing. She took a shaky breath. "I'm scared, I know," he said, "but you don't have to face it alone." She didn't move. Her mind told her to walk away, but her feet refused. Finally, she whispered, "If I stay, they'll come back." Daniel nodded once. "Then I'll be here to answer the door." The wind howled again, but for the first time that night, Sarah didn't feel its bite. She stepped back inside. Closing the door behind her, Daniel threw another log onto the fire. The flames leaped higher, chasing away the shadows. As they sat down again, neither spoke. But something had shifted. The line she had been ready to cross had vanished, replaced by a fragile but growing trust. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, the warmth held. The stand morning came with a heavy gray sky, the kind of sky that promised more snow before the day was done. Daniel was already up, chopping wood outside the shelter. The steady thud of the axe was the only sound in the cold air. Inside, Sarah sipped tea. Her fingers curled around the warm cup. Her thoughts drifted back to the night before, to the moment she had almost left, and to the way Daniel had stopped her without anger or force. She was still wondering why he would stand up for her when so many others wouldn't. The sound of footsteps crunching over snow reached her ears, heavy, deliberate steps. Not the casual pace of a neighbor passing by. She set her cup down and moved toward the window. 3 men were approaching, the same ones she had seen leaning against the wall days ago. Their eyes were cold, their mouths set in hard lines. Daniel noticed them too. He set the axe aside and waited. His breath rose in. white clouds, but his stance didn't shift. The first man stopped a few feet away. "We warned you," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Get rid of her." "No." Daniel said simply. The second man stepped forward. "She's cursed. She'll bring trouble to this whole street. We can't have her here." Daniel's voice was calm. "You don't get to decide who I keep in my home." The third man spat into the snow. "You think we're just going to let you ignore us?" Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "If you're here to threaten me, save your breath," he said. "I'm not sending her out into the cold. Not now. Not ever." Sarah's heart pounded. She had seen confrontations before, and they often ended with fists or worse. She wanted to tell him to stop, to agree to their demands just to keep the peace. But something in the way he stood kept her silent. The first man's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake, human." Daniel stepped closer, his voice steady. The mistake would be listening to you. For a moment, the air between them was as sharp as the winter wind. Then, slowly, the three men turned away. Muttering under their breath as they walked back down the street, Sarah opened the door as Daniel came inside, shaking the snow from his boots. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice low. "Yes, I did," he replied, meeting her eyes. "They need to know you're not alone." Her chest ached again, the same way it had the night before. "They'll come back," she whispered. "Maybe," Daniel said, shrugging off his coat. "But so will I." She stared at him for a long moment, trying to find the words. "Why are you like this?" He gave a faint smile. "Because someone once stood for me when no one else would. Now it's my turn." Her throat felt tight. She turned away, not wanting him to see the tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't owe me anything," Daniel said, his tone gentle. "Just stay warm." The rest of the day passed in a quiet rhythm. Daniel chopped more wood. Sarah mended a tear in the blanket. Outside, the sky darkened as the snow began to fall again. That night, as they sat by the fire, Sarah glanced at him. "No one has ever spoken for me like that," she said. "Then they've been wrong all this time," Daniel replied without hesitation. She didn't answer, but in her heart, something shifted again. The walls she had built to keep herself safe were still there, but cracks had started to form, and through those cracks, warmth was slowly finding its way in. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the street in silence, but inside the shelter, Sarah felt for the first time that maybe, just maybe, she was no longer standing alone. The warmth she wanted days passed, and the storms came and went. The streets outside lay buried under layers of snow, untouched except for the narrow path Daniel kept clear from the shelter to the market. The whispers in the town hadn't stopped, but they had grown quieter. Some people still turned away when they saw her. Others muttered as she passed, but the threats had not returned. Perhaps because the three men who had confronted Daniel now kept their distance. Sarah spent more time outside during the day, walking to the edge of the street where the snow met the forest line. The cold air no longer bit so sharply, and her steps no longer carried the weight of constant fear. Inside the shelter, she began to leave small traces of herself, a folded scarf on the table, a pot of soup simmering on the stove when Daniel returned from gathering wood, little signs that she was no longer just a guest. One evening, the fire was burning bright, filling the room with a golden glow. Daniel was repairing a chair leg while Sarah sat by the window, watching the snow fall. She turned to him suddenly. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" Daniel looked up. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but right now I have a reason to stay." Her eyes softened. "And that reason is?" He smiled faintly. "You." The words struck her harder than the cold ever had. She lowered her gaze, hiding the small, shy smile that formed before she could stop it. Later, as the night deepened, they shared a quiet meal. The wind outside rattled the windows, but inside, It was warm. Sarah caught herself thinking about the first night she had stepped through that door, about the fear, the doubt, and the way. Daniel had simply said, "It's your choice." She realized now that it had been more than an offer of warmth. It had been an offer of belonging. When they had finished eating, Sarah moved closer to the fire. The glow lit her face, softening the lines that months of cold and hardship had carved there. "No home wanted a widow like me," she said quietly. "But you. You gave me one." Daniel set down his cup and looked at her across the flickering light. "And I'm never taking it away." The words wrapped around her like another blanket, warmer than anything she had ever owned. For a long moment, she just sat there, letting herself believe them, letting herself trust. She thought about the years ahead, and for once, they didn't feel like an empty road. She imagined cooking meals in the small room, mending clothes by the fire, and hearing Daniel's voice cut through the winter storms, steady and sure. When the fire burned low, Daniel stood and added another log. The flames leaped higher, filling the space with light again. Sarah watched him, and something inside her settled. That night, as she lay in the bed, she didn't feel the urge to keep her boots nearby in case she had to leave quickly. She didn't rehearse in her mind the excuses she might give if someone told her to go. Instead, she listened to the soft sound of Daniel's breathing near the stove and the steady crackle of the fire. For the first time since her mate's death, she wasn't just surviving, she was living. And in the shelter's quiet, with the warmth holding back the cold, Sarah knew she had found what she had been searching for all along, not just heat for her body, but a place where her heart could rest.